In the last 72 hours, Britain has been shaken by a crisis no one saw coming. In this fictional scenario, everything begins with a simple document pushed quietly across the Prime Minister's desk. A reform package almost routine at first glance meant to redefine the structure of the Commonwealth. But inside, hidden under clean legal language and bureaucratic phrasing, was a proposal that would detonate into the biggest constitutional confrontation in modern British history. The plan would strip the monarchy of its long-standing role as head of the Commonwealth and replace it with an elected rotating presidency at Iran among all member nations. No consultation, no international dialogue, no public explanation, just a unilateral government decision affecting 56 nations and nearly one-third of the world's population. In this fictional world, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, believed it would be a quiet reform. But at precisely 9:47 in the morning, Buckingham Palace released a short, cold statement that froze the entire political establishment. 12 words. This decision stands in contradiction to constitutional practice. We must decline. Those words were not ceremonial. They were not polite disagreement. They were a direct rejection of royal veto in everything but name. Something that had not happened in over 7 decades. The palace had drawn a line, and for the first time since the end of the Second World War, the monarch was openly resisting his own government. What followed inside Downing Street, according to fictional insiders in this story, was absolute chaos. Ministers were summoned without warning. Officials arrived pale and tight-lipped. The Prime Minister entered the cabinet room, visibly furious. Multiple leaks claim he slammed his fists on the table, shouting, "We run this country, not the palace, not tradition, not outdated symbolism." The mood turned darker when he reportedly referred to the Commonwealth as a colonial relic nobody asked for. Those comments, whispered through corridors and carried out of the room on nervous aide's breath, spread across Westminster within hours, and outside those walls, they hit the very group that had protected the Commonwealth for generations, veterans. Videos began popping up online, a retired colonel in his 70s recording from his small kitchen, a former Royal Navy captain speaking through emotion, dozens of servicemen and women demanding respect for an institution they had dedicated their lives to. A petition emerged, gathering tens of thousands of signatures in a single night. The message was simple: the government had crossed a line. But while the political class was still arguing behind closed doors, King Charles made his move in this fictional timeline. At 4:15 p.m., the gates of Windsor Castle closed for what was described publicly as a private meeting. In truth, it was something far more extraordinary: an emergency summit of Commonwealth High Commissioners. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and more than a dozen additional nations sent their representatives. Some were flown in quietly, some arrived unannounced. There were no reporters, no cameras, no official agenda, just the king and the nations that built the Commonwealth alongside Britain. According to this fictional account, the king delivered a speech unlike anything heard from a monarch in decades. Calm, steady, deliberate yet carrying an unmistakable warning. The Commonwealth is not an object to be rearranged at the convenience of any single government. It is a partnership of equals. To change it without consent would be to betray its very foundation. The room erupted into applause. Some officials later described it not as a speech, but as a moment of leadership they did not expect, especially from a figure many believed was purely symbolic. But what came after dinner, the part no one was supposed to hear, changed the course of the crisis. In this fictional setting, representatives from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand told the king directly that they would oppose the reforms, regardless of what Westminster demanded. Canada's envoy reportedly said, "Our relationship with the Crown is built on respect, not British government instruction." Australia cautioned, "These decisions belong to Australians, not to British politics." And with those words, the crisis expanded from a domestic dispute into an international rebellion, Markets felt it immediately. The pound slid. Investors panicked. News outlets scrambled. And for the first time in years, the global stage looked toward Britain not with curiosity, but with alarm. This fictional unfolding showed how fragile political legitimacy can be when tradition, identity, and government collide. Inside Parliament, the fallout was catastrophic for the Prime Minister. Cabinet members whispered about succession. Advisors drafted resignation letters just in case. WhatsApp groups filled with panic, anger, and outrage. Some messages questioned the Prime Minister's judgment. Others accused him of provoking a crisis that could destabilize Britain's diplomatic standing for years. What unsettled many most was the revelation again, within this fictional scenario, that the reform plan had been drafted without consulting the Foreign Office's Commonwealth experts. Those officials, the people who understood the delicate history of 56 nations tied not by force, but by choice, had been bypassed completely. Several leaks suggested they had warned repeatedly that unilateral changes would break trust and ignite resistance. But their warnings were ignored, and now the consequences were unfolding live across every screen in the country. Meanwhile, the fictional political landscape outside government shifted like an earthquake. Opposition parties seized their moment. Reform UK, under Nigel Farage, surged as he delivered speech accusing the government of attacking British history and humiliating Britain abroad. His rallies grew, donations spiked, polls tightened. Suddenly, what had been a stable political environment looked like a battlefield. Back in Westminster, Labour MPs whispered about no confidence votes. Senior ministers held private meetings without the Prime Minister present. Even the Chancellor, normally his strongest ally, held quiet discussions with backbench MPs about alternative leadership. She denied any ambition publicly, but in this fictional script, it became clear that she was at least preparing for the possibility of a vacancy. All the while, the King remained silent publicly, but hyperactive privately. Legal experts were quietly summoned to examine the limits of royal authority. Could the monarch refuse royal assent to legislation? Could he delay it? Could he send it back for reconsideration? Historically, such powers had not been used in more than 300 years, but technically they still existed. And the fictional question that began to haunt every political figure was simple: what if the monarch actually used them? Polls in this fictional scenario added more fuel to the fire. A majority of the public backed the King's intervention. Many felt the Prime Minister had overreached. Others believed that the Commonwealth should not be reshaped without input from the nations it represents. And slowly, the storyline began to shift from government versus monarchy to public versus government. As Parliament prepared to reconvene, the nation braced for what could be the most consequential debate in generations. Would the Prime Minister double down and push forward? Would he retreat? Would his own party abandon him before the vote even happened? Political commentators, fictional in this story, speculated about every possible outcome: a snap election, a leadership challenge, a government collapse, or a constitutional showdown unlike anything modern Britain has seen. In this alternative history narrative, one thing became clear. Power was shifting not through elections or campaigns, but through institutions, crisis, and public sentiment. And at the center of it all stood two men: a Prime Minister determined to modernize an institution he considered outdated, and a King determined to protect a partnership he saw as part of Britain's identity. The fictional question that hangs over this scenario is the same one the viewers must decide. If a Prime Minister confronts tradition head-on, does he reshape the country or destroy himself? And if a monarch steps beyond ceremony, is he defending the nation or reviving powers that should remain in the past? The story is far from over. And if this scenario ever unfolded in real life, the next 72 hours would determine the fate of Britain's government, its monarchy, and its place on the world stage. Tell us in the comments, who would the public side with, and what would Britain look like after a crisis like this?